Disney cartoons in 2004. Hello Jetix, goodbye
Funky fresh moves.
By this year, their home was undeniably Disney Channel. For the next few years, they could live in harmony with the growing array of live-action sitcoms and be expected to last a fair while. They'd bowled a turkey of 3 instantly distinct and popular animated series, and their 4th original was looking like it was going to ride that wave. Unfortunately, in the world of Dave the Barbarian, surfboards hadn't been invented yet. We might never know what happened there. It worked, it fit into this experimental era of not fitting in, and had a fun world to play with, but some Disney shows in this decade swam while others sunk. And Dave the Barbarian was chosen to sink into obscurity after a memorable year of tall tales and heroic ha-has. It got on TV and people liked it. That's a victory from a certain perspective, because making a TV show is hard. Our creator today is Doug Langdale, a very experienced staff member in the TV animation scene since the 90s. Starting as a writer and story editor on the Disney Afternoon series Darkwing Duck, he'd bounce around positions across different studios. Langdale's stylings are hard to trace because no 2 shows he's worked on are the exact same. He'd been credited as a creator before alongside Doug Knapple on the Earthworm Jim cartoon and Project Geeka, like I said back in my Cat Scratch review, but instead of following that up with Cats and Robot Wars, Doug Langdale created The Weekenders for Disney's One Saturday Morning in 2000, a show I've never had any desire to rewatch. Apparently it's decent, but say the words average turn of the millennium tween slice of life cartoon, and this is exactly what pops into my head, sorry. It's a good thing Doug Langdale had such a varied creative scope then, because his next show would be completely different. A show set in medieval times about kingdoms, beasts, dragons, and barbarians. He settled on the name Dave for his barbarian protagonist, because it was the silliest name you could think of for that occupation. So is Conan, and no one ever made fun of him. Dave the Barbarian premiered on Disney Channel on January 23rd, 2004, with a 5-episode marathon. Not 5 segments, 5 half hours. I've mentioned before they did something similar with Brandy and Mr. Whiskers, which premiered later in the year, and how it's a bad idea to drop this much at once on a child demographic for a show that's literally just begun existing. And worse, these 5 episodes ended up being nearly a quarter of the show, because Dave the Barbarian would only run for 21 episodes, ending on January 22nd, 2005. Exactly 365 days, but not a full year, because 2004 was a leap year, don't you know? Doug Langdale has remained prolific since then, and I'm sure the same can be said for most of the writers, artists, voice actors, and what have you. But it's a shame Dave's adventures ended so abruptly. Reruns on Disney Channel and Toon Disney persisted until 2009, so it wasn't forgotten overnight, but it petered out as everyone came to accept it was a one and done. Still, it was a noteworthy season. Why else would I be talking about it 20 years later?
Our heroes are waiting patiently for their story to begin.
Come on! We're like 2 minutes in already!
This show is set in the middle-aged kingdom of Udragoth. The king and queen would be running things if they weren't traveling the world fighting evil elsewhere, so their royal and not-so-royal children are put in the care of a wizard. Together, they save Udragoth from various dangers, and I mean various. No telling what they'll be up against next, if it's magic, or even science. Despite the potential for farcical mayhem, you can see how this slotted into Disney Channel with the family aspect. The main trio being siblings, their parents having a cool job but always being out of reach. It commands expected messages about family and responsibility and all that. Plus, they got the right cast of characters for it. Dave himself is really just a big softie, a little oafish too, but mostly resourceful and compassionate. He's a nice change of image for barbarians, while still being able to pull off the heroics. His oldest sister Candy is the one left in charge of Udragoth, but would much rather be shopping or hanging out with her friends. Given she's the sibling with the most responsibility, being the substitute ruler for a whole kingdom, Candy's stories tend to have more gravitas, but she can usually pull through and save her own little crisis. Their youngest sibling, Fang, is Tress MacNeille reprising her role as Dot Warner but at 100% Goblin mode. She acts like a caveman in the Middle Ages, it's awesome. Not so far gone that she doesn't care about her family, because she does, but one of those kids you should just let be a kid. Or else. Taking care of all of them is their Uncle Oswich, a semi-competent wizard. He knows what he's doing, but is not an expert at his spells. I can buy this balance because if a spell goes wrong, that's a new plot in the wings. Other castle dwellers include Dave's sword, Lula, who has a mind of her own. She's voiced by Estelle Harris, so gonna take part in her trademark raspy nagging, but not a bad thing as long as they give her her own stories and desires and interests. Even the sword is a well-rounded character. Dave also has a pet dragon, Faffy, who just sort of floats around doing whimsical pet things and once in a while being called in for a pet plot. They're okay pet plots, but not the most original except for starring a dragon this time. Candy has a pet too, Twinkle the Marvel Horse, who's always alone in his stable with his dark thoughts. Barely does a thing, but the writers will sometimes pop us down here if they've got a good Christopher Walken joke for us. Lastly for the family, there's of course the King and Queen. They'll call the castle on the crystal ball every couple episodes, but never returned over the span of the show's short run. It's not their fault, they're just on a death-defying business trip. If they got a second season, I'm betting money they would have returned to Udragoth for at least one episode, maybe the finale. There's a couple recurring villains that recurred as much as possible, including Chuckles the Piggy. This loud little adversary's main weapon is his cuteness. I mean, he's okay on the cute scale, but funnier than he is precious or evil. Dave gets an evil girlfriend in the form of Princess Irma Plotz of Hyragoth. They actually get along despite Irma's evil family heritage. I like this little Romeo and Juliet thing they have going on. My favourite villain and character overall would be Ned Frischman, some nerdy office worker from the distant future of 10 years ago, who sometimes goes back in time to take control of the past. Ned is a fascinatingly mundane villain for how grand his plans are, and I think the idea of someone from contemporary times going back to mess with history adds to the silliness of it. Last of all is the narrator, who speaks in this posh, sophisticated voice, but is often gobsmacked by how absurd the plots get. He becomes a character in his own right, much like Udragoth itself is a character just as much as a location.
Thinking quickly, Dave constructs a homemade megaphone using only some string, a squirrel, and a megaphone.
This is the only joke from the show that's entered the consciousness of animation fans, and can I say I'm surprised. This show can be funny, but it's a quaint sort of funny. The jokes sort of feel like they came from a 60s cartoon, which I hope comes off as a point of praise. Comedy doesn't all have to be this laugh-out-loud leap forward for television, as long as it keeps you smiling on a consistent basis, which is how I feel about the best cartoons from the 60s. Most of the narrators' roles here give me Rocky and Bullwinkle vibes too, to drive this comparison home. The meta jokes and fourth wall breaks are plentiful, but not as postmodern as in later 2000s cartoons like Phineas and Ferb and Chowder. More of the humour still comes from anachronisms. If today is the day you learn that word, an anachronism is when a work set in a time period features something uncharacteristic of the period, i.e., internet in the Middle Ages. That's the best example I've got, but there's a couple other instances of this scattered around for comedic effect, and pretty good effect too. And it's not enough to diminish the impact of the more classical genres they go for, like adventure and fantasy. As for what stories they pursued, I'll say there was a fair balance between the three main characters. You'll have Dave sheepishly battling monsters and learning to grow more of a backbone, Candy taking on the reins of the kingdom but still needing to comprehend what she's doing a bit more, and Fang being a little menace but chilling out and fixing a problem sometimes. There was enough to go around in this single season we spent with them. I can say the same for the villains, many of them left their mark on the show despite appearing in less episodes individually. As for the animation, it's pretty good. The designs have a Steven Silver flair to them, namely in the eyes, so it surprised me to learn he didn't work on this show whatsoever. I think the world design could have popped a little more. The backgrounds and props are fine, but it's one of those early HD cartoons where the texturing worked upon original broadcast in standard definition, but is more distracting in current releases. Or in the case of an obscure show like this not on Disney+, whatever recordings you can find on the internet. Seriously, why isn't this on Disney Plus? It wouldn't take up too much bandwidth.
And so the battle rages on, day after day, year after year.
It's really only been 5 minutes.
I don't know why I try.
There's only one season, I just wanted you to see that. Because of that, I don't have any seasonal trends to cover, so... no delays, here's the best list. A Pig Story is a joke you've probably heard before. The villain kidnaps the narrator and takes control of the story. It especially feels like something from a cartoon your parents watched, but I like Chuckles enough to like the spin he puts on this. Fiends and Family lives up to its name by being quite fiendish. Chuckles disguises himself as the king to mess with Fang, and it's apt to see a more vulnerable side to Fang come out of this. Demonstrates how much the king and queen mean to the castle. Happy Glasses is another Chuckles one, and another personal one, with the plan involving turning the Barbarians against each other by showing them picturesque realities. We're shown all their desires, except for who they love the most. Faffy. My two favourite episodes are the Ned Frischman episodes. Ned Frischman, Man of Tomorrow, for having the most unpredictable yet relatable world domination scheme you could think of, and I Love Neddy for being far more predictable and proven to work in real life. Of everything the show left on the table, Ned's plots of controlling the past with relatively modern technology is the routine I most wanted to see continue. Expect a pickier, worse list than usual. There's only 41 segments, and most of these aren't even bad, just the less good ones. The Way of the Dave was the first episode produced, and as tends to happen, is left in the dust by everything that comes after. An alright introduction to the show, but nothing more than alright. Here There Be Dragons is a pretty forgettable Faffy episode about whether he's more of a dragon or a barbarian or something. Faffy's cute, but like I said earlier, they had to struggle to make weighty stories with him. Same with Pet Threat, which employs the ever so hit or miss but mostly miss new pet that outshines the old pet trope. If you know me well, you'd know that I've been living under a rock with bad Wi-Fi since 2009. Please tell me cartoons aren't still doing this plot. Band feels particularly gimmicky. The Barbarians form a rock band and go through your typical rock group struggles, which distracts them from the trouble going on around them. You've probably seen this before, but smarter. And my least favourite episode would be The Brutish Are Coming. Faffy episode, he gets turned into a more ferocious fella and causes more harm because Oswald's spell ain't what it cracked up to be. I'm really throwing Faffy under for this review, I'm sorry buddy. I think he's fine, just not as dynamic as the rest of the cast. Most of Dave the Barbarian holds up. Not all of it, but I enjoyed my time with it, and you should too if you've got the 2000s kids comedy cartoon itch. It took what has worked in animation before and put its own spin on it. With a promising environment you're left wanting more of. I know you've waited nearly the entire year to see me review this show, and it's one of my shorter ones, but Disney really left something cool hanging. Find it however you can, and relish in the barbarianism.
This is Quick Draw McGraw on Boomerang from Cartoon Network.
We'll be right back to Gravity Falls on Disney XD.
I'm just not funny enough to rule the world. Oh, if only I could make people laugh. If